Yeah, let us recapitulate what we have learned so far in errors. We learned that errors are of three types. They can come from the system of measurement, from the instruments that we use for making the measurements, and these errors are calculable, compensatable. We quantify them by giving the accuracy in the measurement. We also have errors that are random in nature, and random errors are quantified by the precision index. The moment random errors creep in, the measurement will not become repeatable. If you take 2-3 measurements, they will be different, right. On the other hand, if I have accuracy problem, if I take n measurements, all n measurements will have accuracy problems, right. So precision means repeatability, problems with repeatability. We take n measurements, as many measurements as possible, calculate the average value, right, average value, and calculate the deviation. The deviation, there are two things that are in practice: the peak deviation, which is used in all manufactured quantities, especially if you are going to do fitting, then the standard deviation. If n is large, standard deviation can be equated to RMS deviation, right. So we can have RMS deviation. And in the last class, we found out that if I have a quantity u plus v, where u and v have random errors, and I compute the sum, then we found out that sigma w is equal to square root of sigma u square plus sigma v square, or we can indirectly say that the variance sigma w square equal to sum of the variates of the sum set. Now similarly, we can do for any computation from fundamental, as we have done in the for the accuracy. Here also it would be nice if you have a formula, right, rather than going back to fundamentals calculating long handed, right. We derive a formula now. I assume that I am computing y as a function of x1, x2, xn, where x1, x2, xn all have standard deviation of sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma n, right. Now we can call these sigmas as small perturbation in y, right. So mathematically there is a small change in y which I have to find out as a function of small changes in x1, x2, xn, right. So let me write it like this: delta y, the deviation in y, would be dou f by dou x1 in deviation in x1 plus dou f by dou x2 into deviation in x2, and so on, right, very small values. Okay. Now if I want the standard deviation, then I will have to put 1 by n minus 1 sigma n is equal to 1 to n delta y square, because that is a deviation, and of course I will have to put a square root. Let us not put the square root here, we will find only this, variance, then we can put the square root at the end, right. So, this would be dou f by dou x1 into delta x1 plus dou f by dou x2 into delta x2 whole square, right. So, this will become dou f by dou x1 into delta x1 square plus dou f by dou x2 square into delta x2 square plus so on, and then I will have the cross products dou f by dou x1 into dou f by dou x2 into delta x1 delta x2, right. This will be plus dou f by dou x1 into dou f by dou x3 into delta x1 delta x3 and so on, right. I will have x1 x2 x1 x3 x1 x4 x4 x1 x5 x1 xn, then I will also have x2 x3 x2 x4 all the cross products, right. So, I will have all the dotted ones. Okay. Now, when I take summation, this would be dou f by dou x1 whole square into summation over n minus 1 delta x1 square, right. So, this we know would be, so if I have to do this summation here, this summation also has to be on this side with whatever variates I have, maybe x1 I have only n variates, x2 I have m variates, x3 I have p variates, right. Numbers can differ, but it does not matter, whatever be the summation I have to do that summation, right. And if I look at here, this would be sigma x1 square plus dou f by dou x2 into sigma x2 square etc., right. I will have up to sigma xn square, right. Sensitivity of the function I am using for computing y with respect to that particular variate square into the sigma of that variate square, right. So, all those terms will be there. Now, we look at the cross product terms. I am going to sum the deviation in x1 over the entire range of x1, right. What is the sum of deviation over entire range? 0, right. The sum of entire range is 0, that is how we define the average value, right, and that is how we calculate the standard deviation, right. So, sigma delta x1 would be 0, sigma delta x2 will be 0, again summated over their number of variates, right. X1 may be over n variates, x2 may be over m variates, x3 may be over p variates and so on. So, all this when I summation would go to 0, all the cross products, I do not have to calculate at all. So, which means on this side this is sigma y square, I get dou f by dou x1 whole square into sigma x1 square, dou f by dou x2 whole square into sigma x2 square, dou f by dou x3 whole square into sigma x3 square and so on, right. So, we look at the variate in the calculated function, the variance in the calculated function is the sensitivity of the function of a particular variate into the variance of that variate, right, sensitivity square into variance and so on, right. It is quite easy to remember, it is a very simple formula. Okay. So, please cross check for u plus v, you will find that sigma w square is equal to sigma u square plus sigma v square, right. And here we have taken the deviation, standard deviation in absolute quantities. If you are going to put percentage deviation, then you will have to divide delta y by y, right, and you will have 1 by y on this side, because I have to divide by y here, right, to make it y divide by y multiply by 100 to get the percentage standard deviation. So I will have to divide the right hand side also by y, then it will become, I will have to put x1 here, x1 here, then this becomes percentage in deviation in x1. So I will have x1 by y into percentage deviation in x1, right. So if you are using percentage deviation, it is not enough that we multiply only by the sensitivity, we also have to multiply by x1 by y, x2 by y and x2 by y whole square, right. Please note this I have derived, I repeat this once again, I derived for absolute values of sigma. If it is percentage sigma is involved, you will have to use a different formula. So we now go to the we learnt about analog indicating instruments that help us measure different quantities, right. In the analog indicating instruments, I have not dealt with a particular form of instrument called the ohm meter, because no longer you will have an ohm meter like that available to you today, right. But those who are interested in understanding how people measure resistances using analog indicating instruments, please look at the reference books. And we learnt that any measurement will have different types of errors, and we learnt how to deal with them, how to handle those errors, right. You must be very careful, especially when you are measuring using instruments which have a full scale error as a specification and not error in the reading, right. In general, try to get a value as close to the full scale of the instrument that you are using, right. Change the range if you have ranges on your instrument, so that you get a reading very close to the full scale. Now after getting the analog indicating instruments, as we all learnt, AC became the norm for electrical power for generation, transmission and distribution, right. And people wanted to look at what happens on a real time, right, whether I am getting a voltage, if I am getting a voltage which is a sine wave, whether I am, it is really a sine wave or something is happening, right. And in the meantime, electronics also grew up, right. We had the thermionic valves doing quite a lot of functions, including some of the computer functions that we have, right, were implemented in those days with a device known as the thermionic valve, right. So people wanted to look at the waveforms, so they wanted a graphical instrument which will tell them not only what is the RMS value of the voltage, right, which will show them the actual variation in the voltage or current or whatever you are trying to look at, right. So the next topic that we are going to deal with is graphical instruments. The very first graphical instruments that were developed were recorders. They were known as YT recorders and XY recorders, right. YT recorder, as the name indicates, the y axis was the amplitude of whatever you are trying to measure, x axis is time, right. In the XY recorder, you have you can choose what is on the x and what is on the y, right. And these were mostly electromechanical recorders. In the initial stage, instead of putting a pointer on the movement of the scale, right, on the angular scale, they simply attached a writing pen at the end of the pointer, so it will draw on a paper, right. The paper was permitted to move using a clockwork mechanism, right. Then they had the servo mechanism to move proportional to your x input on the x direction, proportional to the y input on the y direction. These were two motors which control the pens in the x and y direction, and quite a lot of advancement took place there. People even developed specific language to be used with these recorders, and all these are history now. They no longer exist and we do not have to really learn about them. The second development after recorders was the oscilloscope. The very first oscilloscope that was created was known as oscillophil, because it would not show a waveform, it will draw on a photographic paper. You will have to, like whatever you do with a photographic paper, you will have to take it out, develop and see the waveform. You can't see it online, right. But later the same technology that was used for the oscillophil was converted into seeing the waveform in real time, right. In the oscilloscope, the first development was the CRO, cathode ray oscilloscope, right. So the cathode ray oscilloscope as the name indicates, simply known as CRO, as the name indicates, uses what is known as a cathode ray, right. We will have to go back to the thermionic valves, right. In the yesteryears, the valves used a glass bulb, right, and the glass bulb was completely evacuated, right. The pressure inside was 10 power minus 8 tar or so, so there is nothing inside, vacuum. You put a small heater, normally this is made of tungsten, and if you heat up tungsten, because tungsten's work function is small, right. What is the work function? The energy required to liberate the outermost electrons in the outermost shell. So if I heat tungsten, I will liberate large number of electrons from its outermost shell, right. So I will have large number of free electrons available. Then we have the we put a metallic sheet close to this electrode and a sheet away from the electrode, and we supply a positive and negative voltage. The electrons that are generated here will be attracted to the plate which is given the positive voltage. We call this as the anode and this as the cathode, and this is nothing but a thermionic valve, right. We use thermal energy to generate the ions, in this case electrons, right, and we use it as a valve because the current will flow only in one direction. If I reverse, electrons will be pushed back, no current will flow. If I reverse the voltage, no current will flow. This is the first diode, so to say, right. It is known as the thermal valve diode, right, or diode valve, whichever way you call it. Then we can add a control grid here. Then we have what is known as a triode, right, and people developed pentode where there were 5 electrodes inside a thermionic valve and so on. And the beam of electrons that go from the cathode to anode is known as the cathode ray, right. The cathode ray oscilloscope uses this cathode ray and to display. So let us look at how it is done. We have the same fermionic tube, but we make it in a special shape. This is again completely evacuated. So we have vacuum, very low pressure, there is nothing inside, everything is sucked out, right, and we put a tungsten filament and heat it up. So I will get electrons, free electrons. Now I keep a connection here and I connect a large voltage, typically about 20 kilovolts, right, and for modern day CROs it can go as high as 100 kilovolts, 80 kilovolts or 100 kilovolts, right. So the initial ones had 10 to 20 kilovolts, right. Because now I have a very high positive voltage, all these electrons will travel and make an electron beam or electron ray, not a beam, right. So if this electron travels like this, it may go hit the glass here, come back and complete the circuit, right. So I will have a current, and part of the current is electrons physically moving from here to here. Now on this glass I coat the screen with a material called phosphor, right. The phosphor material when hit by an electron will convert the kinetic energy of the electron into light energy and you will have light. This was known to people quite long back, right, and they use this to generate what is known as a magic eye, right. This is a small display, green phosphor display, which would increase or decrease in its witness when you are coming very close to a radio station on a radio, right, valve radio. Okay. So we coat the screen with phosphor. So when I have an electron that hits the screen, it will transfer its kinetic energy to light, right, and initially most of the phosphor people could develop was either green or bluish green light was coming out. So that continued forever. Today of course we can generate any color of light we want, right, and so there is a light. Now if I do not do anything, the electrons will come haphazardly and the entire front portion, right, if I make this front portion something like this, right, that is a 3-dimensional view. So the entire front portion would be glowing, right, but that is not what we want. What we want was to display a waveform. If I want to display a waveform, then I must be able to make a dot and then move the dot on the screen so that I can display the waveform. Okay. Now there is another problem. When the electron hits, light glows and that is it, the light will switch off, right, it is not going to glow forever, right. So when I start moving the dots to display my waveform, when I move here this dot would have already extinguished, when I move here the previous dot would have already died out, right. So it will not be possible to see, but something nice happens. Our eye has something called a persistence time, right. If something is persisting, right, again and again and again, we do not see it as switching off and on, right. The persistence time is somewhere around, what is the time? It is about approximately 35-40 milliseconds, right. So, if we have anything repeating more than 17 times a second, we cannot see it as blinking, we see it as though it is always glowing. That is the same principle our movies work, right. In the movies you have the picture interrupted more than 17 frames a second, right. In your television the pictures appear maybe 25 frames, 60 frames, now you have 80-90 frames a second if you have a high definition TV. Right. So, if I am able to display the same waveform again and again more than 20 times a second, right, I will not see the dot disappearing, I will see it as though it is a stationary waveform, right. So, these two things are necessary if I want to use this cathode ray and display a waveform, right. So, let us see how we can make a spot. To make a spot, all the electrons I generate must come and focus on a particular place, right, focus on a particular place. So, which means I must be able to have a focusing mechanism, right, to focus these electrons onto the screen as a simple dot, right. If I have photons, I know very well, very easily I can focus, right, all I need is a lens, right. If I use a lens on my light, I can focus the light, all of us have done in our school in physics experiment. To focus electrons, I need an electronic lens, or more precisely electrostatic lens. So, what we do is we keep 3 tubes in the path of the electron, and we also put a grid here and then apply a negative voltage to this grid, small negative voltage, so that any electrons that hit the grid will go back, and only through the small hole in the grid the electrons will start going. Right. So, it is not that the entire all the electrons that are generated by the tungsten wire will go haphazardly, they are already through the slit sort of forced to become a beam, right. But still there is no way I can control an electron that is going like this to go like this, right, it can go. If it started its velocity in that direction, right, it will go and hit the glass tube, then get diverted and come back here. Right. Now, in these 3 metallic tubes, I give positive voltage to the 2 extreme tubes, right, and the negative voltage to the inner tube, right. I will show it separately. I give a cutaway section, this is my first tube, this is my second tube, this is my third tube, right. This is positive and this is negative, right. And if I look at the equipotential lines, right, I will have the lines like this. So, these are electrostatic field lines, right. Now, an electron going at the center will not be troubled by these field lines, right. Electron going at the center will go straight. If the electron is at an angle, if the electron is moving at an angle, the moment it touches the field lines, it will be diverted, so that it changes, it bends to come back into the central line, right. And the amount of bending that I can do depends upon the potential difference we keep between the two tubes and also the distance between the tubes, right, the electrostatic lens that I create. Okay. So, by adjusting this potential I will be able to collate all the electrons at a particular point, right. Okay. By simply having 3 tubes with the central tube having a lesser potential than the outer tubes, it is possible to focus the electrons. So, we call this as focusing anodes. This is the cathode, we already said, this is the cathode, these 3 are focusing anodes. Right, and this is the anode, final anode, we call this as accelerating anode, because of the large voltage applied onto the accelerating anode, the electrons are really pulled at very high velocity, right, nearly equal to the speed of light. Okay, now we have moved all these electrons into one spot. So, if I do not do anything, the spot will be at the center, right, the spot would be at the center. Now, it should be possible for me to move the spot up or down, left or right, then only I can write on the screen, right. To do this we use 2 other plates, 2 set of plates, one kept horizontally, one set kept horizontally, the other set kept vertically, right. The set that is kept horizontally is known as the vertical deflection plate, and the 2 plates that are kept vertical, metallic plates, they are called horizontal deflection plates. Right, vertical deflection plates are horizontal, horizontal deflection plates are vertical, right, ulta. Now, let us assume that I apply a voltage difference between the vertical deflection plates, right. The top I have given a small positive voltage. If I had no voltage, the electrons would have travelled like this. Now, because I have given a positive voltage, the electrons would start getting attracted, because they are not moving very fast, right, they will not just go vertical, there is a force in the horizontal direction, there is a force in the vertical direction. So, they will change the direction and then move on the vertical line, right. And of course, if I keep on increasing this voltage, the electrons will start moving through the plate and come back, right, it will not go to the screen, which means the spot would have moved up and beyond the screen, right. Now, if I reverse the polarity, I make this bottom plate positive and top plate negative. Now, the electrons will be attracted towards the bottom plate and it will change direction in the downward direction, and the spot would now move to the bottom side of the screen. So, by controlling the vertical deflection voltage and polarity, I can move the spot up or down on the screen, right. Similarly, if I apply a positive voltage on the inner side of the horizontal deflection plates, right, the beam would be now shifted towards the outer side, right. So, if for the plus minus, the beam would go to the right side of the screen, to my right side of the screen. If I now reverse the potential and make this as plus and this as minus, the spot would move towards the left, right. So, by simply keeping two deflection plates and controlling the voltage applied on them, it is possible to deflect the spot anywhere on the screen, right. I repeat, we take a vacuum tube, we make a screen on the front side, we make the shape so that I have a long tube and then a flat screen in the front, and we coat phosphor on the inner side of the tube, right, and we connect an anode to the screen, we put a cathode as is normally done in a thermionic wall with a tungsten filament. We have different types of creating this cathode. We can say directly heated cathode, which means the tungsten filament is connected to a supply like this. This is a directly heated cathode. The indirectly heated cathode, the cathode is kept separately, a tungsten sheet, and heating is done by another filament, right. Both have merits and disadvantages, right, depending upon the type of tube that you are going to finally manufacture. So, this is an indirectly heated tube, and we put another metal piece with a small slit, we give a small negative voltage, we call this as the control grid. I will come back to this, why we need this control grid. The very first necessity for having a control grid is to control that the electrons generated by the cathode already form a small beam, right. I do not want the entire tube to be occupied by the electrons, I want the electrons to be a nice pencil beam, right. And further we use 3 anodes, focusing anodes, and focus the beam, electron beam, all electrons that are coming into the beam at a particular spot on the screen. Now, without the deflection plates, that spot would be aligned so that it is at the center of the screen, right. We mechanically put everything so that the beam comes at the center. Now, we put 2 deflection plates, we put one set of horizontal plates, we call this as vertical deflection plates, and one set of vertical plates which we call it as horizontal deflection plates. By controlling the voltage, we can move the spot up or down, left or right, right. By controlling the vertical deflection plates, I can move it up or down. By controlling the voltage, applied voltage and polarity of the applied to the horizontal deflection plates, I can move left or right. Now, I need to move this waveform, this particular spot repeatedly to write whatever waveform I have on the screen, which means if I want to display my sine wave voltage there, I have to move the spot proportional to the sine wave, and not only that, I must repeat it at least more than 20 times a second, right. So, what we now do is we assume that I have a voltage, again for easy understanding I am making it as a sine wave, right. Okay. Now, I generate a voltage right. This voltage I give to the y deflection plates, this voltage I give to the x deflection plates, right. Now, Vx max minus Vx max is the voltage that gives me the deflection of the center point to my leftmost point, right. So, when I give minus Vxm, the spot will be here. So, this is minus Vxm applied to the plates, horizontal deflection plates, and this would be plus Vxm applied to the deflection plates, right. Now, if I do not have this y, when I give minus Vxm at time t equal to 0, this is t equal to 0, the spot will be somewhere here, right, and as the voltage starts increasing, what will happen to the spot? The spot would move to the center. So, at this point it would be center. When it continues to move, the spot would move to the other side. So, without the y, if I give only this waveform, the spot would move from left to right. Now, at the end of this, what I do is I once again take it to minus Vxm and then take it to plus Vxm. Once again, let us forget about y, I have only the x input given. So, it will move from leftmost point, the spot will move to the rightmost point, jump to the leftmost point once again, because here it goes from plus Vxm to minus Vxm, and then it will move to the right, right. So, if I repeat this, I will see a horizontal line, right, repeated at whatever frequency I am repeating, right. If the frequency is more than 20 hertz, I would not see the spots moving, I will see only a line, right, stationary horizontal line. Now, once I have achieved that, now I connect y. Now, what will happen at minus Vxm, the spot is on this direction, I will have 0 voltage to the y. So, y has not moved, x will be leftmost. Now, when I come somewhere here, let us say I have moved a little while, spot would have moved without y, right, in the x, but now not only x is there, y is also there, right. So, spot will try to move here, it will also be pulled in the y direction, the spot will come here, right. When I move a little in time, right, when I come here, it would have moved to x on the x axis here, but x alone is not applied, y input is also applied. So, x and y both will propel the spot. So, I look at the spot will move like this, and at this point what is going to happen? The plus Vxm will go back to minus Vxm. So, a spot will move like this, and then the next cycle it will repeat. So, I will have the sine wave traced, but I will also have this annoying returning line, right, shown on the screen, is not it. So, it will be repeated, if it is repeated more than 20 times, I will see the sine wave, but I will also see the returning line, right. That does not look nice, that is not my waveform, right. My waveform is only a nice sine wave, there is no horizontal line, right. So, one way we can avoid is we generate another voltage waveform, right, where at that transition point for a small amount of time, right, I have shown it very big so that you can understand, just at the end when it is going to near plus Vxm, I will generate a very large negative voltage and apply it to the control grid. So, to the control grid I apply a very large negative voltage minus Vg, large enough so that all electrons generated by the cathode are sent backwards, right, because when I put a negative voltage, what will that grid do? It will repel the electron backwards, right. So, when I do this, during this time I will not have any electrons, so I will not see the faint returning line, right. I will see only my signal, which is this sine wave. If you want to see the signal and only the signal, these things you have to do. You have to generate a waveform like this and feed it to the x plates, right. You have to generate a waveform like this and feed it to the grid. So, this waveform is known as the blanking pulse. Right. Blanking pulse is applied for a very small amount of time when the x plate signal transits from plus Vxm to minus Vxm, right. So that the annoying reverse or returning phase of the signal is not shown. Okay. Initially people did this is my signal, they derived a signal which is in synchronization with the y signal, right. The x signal, if I look at the x signal, it increases rapidly, drops down, increases rapidly, drops down. So if I look at the signal is going to be like this, and this signal is called the sawtooth signal because it looks like a tooth of a saw, right, the hacksaw that we use. So we call this as the sawtooth signal. The sawtooth signal is necessary to make these light spot move from left to right every time I go through one cycle. And if I make this synchronous, which means this frequency equal to this frequency, or this frequency is integral multiple of this frequency, right, then we call these two signals all synchronized, right. If we do that, then we get a CRO which is called a synchronous CRO. So the very first CRO we still use synchronous CRO, but not for generally looking at the waveforms, right. Synchronous CROs have special application, I will talk about it later. For a long time people had only synchronous CRO. Synchronous CRO is very simple, right, and the only problem with the synchronous CRO is we cannot make any measurement on the x axis, because the x axis time is dependent on the y axis time. So if my y varies, time varies, x also varies. If y is, let us say 21 millisecond, this will be 21 millisecond, y is 19 millisecond, this will also be 19 millisecond, right. People did not want this, they wanted to make measurements on the time axis as well, right, exactly at what time what is happening, right. So they wanted to make this time fixed. Let us say I want to fix this as 20 millisecond all the time, I do not care what my input is, I want the spot to move from left to right in 20 millisecond, come back, again move 20 millisecond, come back 20 millisecond and come back, right. So this way we create what is known as a time base, right. The x is based on time and not on y, right. Okay. So we also call this as a time base CRO. Okay. We will learn more about the time based CRO in the next class.